the next 40 minutes, we will have a panel session where Dr. Tina Doe, Dr. Jake Madden, Professor David Lynch and Dr. Helen Spiers will be available to answer questions that you, the audience, have about their keynote speeches or any other relevant questions you may have.
Yeah, okay, that's working. I want to thank you for inviting me here to be the panel chair. I hope you've got some good questions for them. But before we start, can I ask you to do something just a little bit for me? If you could get a pen and paper out. I want you to just write down 3 themes that you heard today. And then I'm just going to review what's happened and then we'll open up for some questions. So what were the 3 themes? While you're doing that, I'll introduce myself. I'm a very lucky person. I've been in education for probably 30-something years now, and I'm now a head of a school in Japan. I've worked in China and Norway, and everywhere in the world that I go, I've been enthralled and engaged with teaching and teachers. We're in a wonderful profession, and we're very, very lucky to be so. So your 3 themes, have you got them down? Okay. Let's reflect on what we've just heard for the next 5 minutes or so, and then I'll open the floor up for questions. When I was listening to the speakers, I was trying to make sense of it myself. And I put it together this way. In a couple of very good researchers and writers wrote a little book called Professional Capital and in schools, and in a way professional capital in building it helps us understand how to make a school outstanding. So, Dr. Jake, or Dr. John, his work, my theme for him, what he spoke about in my humble view is this. He talked about decisional capital in a school. What he was talking about, how do we make wise decisions? How do we make decisions that we think are good for others? He talked about being data-driven. And what does that mean? How does that help us make wise decisions? But he, more importantly, I think, talked about collective responsibility. So for me, his theme was around wise decision-making. In the frame of professional capital, decisional capital is perhaps one of the most important things that a school has. And when you think about all of the speakers, they were talking about that. So was there a theme out there that you had that had anything to do with making wise decisions? The words may not have been the same, but about a process of thinking. We had Tina started with herself at the centre of the universe and ended up realising that in fact sustainability has nothing to do with us as individuals. And I wonder what her theme was about and what resonated. For me, it was about building human capital. Her 4-quarter little model, ST2PP, all right, 2PP, no 2P, that'll be 3 Ps, wouldn't it? It was about building the human capital, if you like, and that's about capability of us as people inside an organisation to work together, to understand each other, to provide a frame where we can do our work. A really important component of what makes an outstanding school. But she also talked about collective responsibility in that, and she talked about the moral obligation of our work and how that brings it together. I'm not sure if any of you thought of it the same way as I did, but I thought it was quite powerful, in particular her model. So human capital is another part of professional capital. It's another element. Ironically, it's in a sense the least important, interestingly enough, according to those 2 people who wrote the book. important, but probably the least. When we moved on to Dr. David, he outlined very, very succinctly, I thought, about what we need to do as teachers. In my humble view, what he was talking about was not only a collective responsibility, but building social capital. Because he talked a lot about working in teams and collaborating and coming together as one, to figuring it out for ourselves. So in a way, we had a structure there from Dr. Tina telling us how we could work together, what we could do personally. We had how can we make good decisions, and then David gave us a framework about how that whole lot could come together as one. And social capital is perhaps the most important thing in any school, and it's about building collective capacity. So far I was thinking about those three themes, and if there'd been three speakers, it would have been very, very good, because there are only three capitals in professional capital, and we had them all covered. But of course Helen gets up and he talks about what it is as a principal to change a school, and someone over here said a challenge was about change and changing habits of things we've done in the past is one of the most challenging things. Understanding as a classroom teacher how to make change for ourselves but also for our kids. It's very difficult. But after listening to it, you embodied what I would call building social capital inside a school. You talked about community. How does she communicate with everybody? You could see it in the pictures of the school that she was creating there and working in, where the social capital was exceptionally strong. She rearranged the furniture, which forced people to work together in a different way. And in doing so, I'm sure their perceptions and understandings and indeed connections with others broke down the balkanised states that we call subject areas or faculties, whereby collaboration became more important and the discussion of teaching and learning was a central key to what was going on. So indeed, I felt that your work was about building social capital, collective capacity of us to work together. Now, it's not my job to ask a question, it's my job to help you think of really good questions. For me, I framed it in terms of professional capital. They all spoke about building an outstanding school where people work together. So, let's open the floor to some questions. Based on your theme, perhaps, ask them very difficult questions, if you possibly could. But if you can't, ask them simple ones, and usually they're the hardest to answer anyway. So is there anyone out there who would like to begin to open the session? We have someone up there in the top corner.
Hisham Metwalli, CEO of Prosperity International. Actually, I've got lots of questions, but I start with Professor David Lynch. You emphasized the importance of sustainability. Can you elaborate to us more on the outcomes, the value added of outstanding school? What kind of things we should be looking at?
When you say the value add, you mean the peripheral things?
Generally, in any organization, and a school is typically an organization, you would expect some learner or community, or even beyond that, outcomes, the value they add to the community and the learner. Mm-hmm. From an outstanding school perspective, what would you say about that?
Okay. So in other words, once you establish the outstanding school, what are the other attributes? What are the sort of things that you'd see?
Definitely.
Right, okay. So in my presentation, I focus very specifically to make the point about the learning side of things, the student side of things. But I guess a good framework is to probably take it back to Hargroves and Fulham, which is what Ken Sull was talking about with professional capital. One of the first things that you start to see in these sorts of environments is that more things become doable. If you like, when you're all playing your own game, you know, the old adage, there's no I in team. Everybody's busy doing their own thing, but the things that actually matter is the collective of the school don't get done, let's say, or there's this notion that somebody else will do it. But what you notice is when you start to create this outstanding school, you open up capacities. You have time to do those value-added things, because that's one of the powerful things that a team provides. The second thing is that it creates a professional community. And when I talk about a professional community, I'm not just talking about the notion of, high learning, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking about how people view their jobs. For example, people want to come to work because they're valued, they're involved. And one of the things that you do see is that, if you like, absenteeism, particularly from teachers, starts to fall. So in effect, what's really happening is when you achieve that outstanding school, essentially you start to enable, basically people start to feel good about themselves because they're actually doing what they trained to do all those years ago, which was teach, and teach well.
Thank you, David. One thing that springs to my mind when David's talking about that is, and it was spoken about by several of the speakers, was about the notion of empowerment. And I think if I was to summarise what he's just said, our role is to create the conditions for empowerment. We can't empower anybody. They do it themselves. So our role is to create the conditions for that to occur. And I'm pretty certain that's what David was talking about there.
Absolutely.
Do we have another question?
Just going to add to what Ken said, and I'm hoping that some of the leaders that I worked with yesterday will showcase the video from Dan Pink. It's called Drive. We watched an RSA animate, and his research indicates that the most powerful enhancement or the most powerful platform for staff that gets them up in the morning wanting to go to work and do the very best they can is three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So it's about being self-driven, getting better at stuff, and having, in our situation, a moral purpose.
I have a question about how we use data with our planning and how we share that data in feedback with the students. Should we be allowing all students to see how all their other peers are progressing, or should we have it as individual learning targets and goals? I mean, I'm considering the emotional and psychological impact of sharing all students' information with the class rather than being specific for that student. Their learning journey is going to be different to those of their peers. How should we share data in the classroom?
I'm going to take it and then pass the microphone on. So I think that you have a learning intention, a macro learning intention or learning goal for a unit of work, and that is a class intention, and there are success criteria for that. And my personal belief and my professional experience with the best success is that that needs to be public. And we talked about this at length at the table over the last 2 days, that kids need to know where they sit in terms of the success criteria to a learning intention. Within that, they should be setting personal learning goals. And personal learning goals are exactly that. They're for me to aspire to and to mark and record my progress. And then for me, at both levels, the learning intention of the cohort or the class, to interrogate that and what it means in terms of further learning and what needs to be gone back to and checked for understanding, etc. And then at the personal level, that should be at a conferencing level with the individual and the teacher. Anyone else?
Can I just share what we do with our students? In a unit of work, the results are put into, the teacher puts the results into an Excel spreadsheet. I made sure all the staff did some basic Excel spreadsheet training. We put that in, it goes up on the on the interactive whiteboard as anonymous data. So they can see that, you know, there's a number of students there who got that range, and so they can see, when they know their result, they can see where they're placed, but they don't know what the other students did. So we respect the results of other students, but they can see where they're placed in the class. In addition to that, the students have a personal learning plan. So they have a conference with the teacher twice a term, and the parents are welcome to come to that. But we make time for that. So we have some days of certain weeks that we will make time. We will cover the teacher's time so that they can have these conferences with the students on a one-on-one. So there's a two-way thing. One is they know where they sit in the class, but they also set their goals for improvement.
Okay, well, thanks, Ms. Sarah, for that question on the use of student data and the feedback to students. Let me premise, no, not premise, that's probably not the right word, but let me contextualise what I think you're asking in terms of the social and, you know, would the child feel unhappy if their name's up on the board and that type of thing. When we're working collaboratively, we know each other's, you know, strengths and weaknesses and such, and we contribute accordingly. Now, the student data needs to be visible. It needs to be upfront. Children learn most of things inside your classroom from listening to you and then working with their peers. 80% of what a child learns is from each other. Right? Children know the strengths and weaknesses of each other. As Dr. Tina has said, you start with your learning intention. Now, having data walls put through your classroom gives you the space. You have to create space for conversations. And students are no different to yourself. The learning process is with them. If they look on the board and they see what all the intentions are, say for maths, okay, we're learning double-digit addition, and then we're learning obtuse angles and such, and you know your children, through your assessment process, some children don't know that. Now, if their names are up there, the children themselves, they look at each other and say, well, why are you, up there on that chart and I'm not? What is it that you've done that I haven't done to get up onto that chart? And then your conversation as the teacher, providing the feedback, you're saying, if you want to score and obtain the double-digit addition benchmark on here and have your name up there, we're still working on understanding that a 1 in the tens column means 10, not 1. So the concrete. So as soon as we get to that stage, then we can get onto that stage and we move forward. So you scaffold the learning for the children, and they can see that. The argument that the children feel embarrassed because they're here and not there, you're sensitive to the conversations. But it's about learning. It's about your learning. It's not about Michael or Peter or George. It's about your learning. And I'm helping you to move along the continuum accordingly. While we do things in a sensitive way, but children need to know. They need to know what the difference is. If you want to be at the top of the tree, you need to know what the top of the tree looks like, right? Then you've got to work out how you get to that top of the tree. And if someone else has been at the top of the tree, they can share that with you and say, well, you've got to climb on this limb and do that limb, and then you practice and move the way forward there. So I think that the whole notion of data walls and having information up there and sharing that information with the children is a vital step to making sure the children know what it looks like, what success looks like, and how to achieve that success by sharing and working in a collaborative type environment. And I think that the more we do that, the more we let the children know what is expected and defining that for them very clearly and giving them the scaffolding to get to that point, the attainment levels will continue to grow.
I think the question that you ask is a really fundamental one, and I'd make a couple of quick comments. The first thing is that you've got to be mindful about what data you collect for a start. Okay, you go in any classroom, there's a whole lot of data. So data has a purpose. You're collecting data for a particular purpose. Once you've established what that purpose is, then it logically follows what you do with it. But I'm also going to say this. For most people, pretty much everybody who's been prepared in teacher education programs around the world, data is not something that you covered. So it will be new. It's new work. So part of projects like this, there's an emphasis on professional learning, and that professional learning covers data. What's valid data? What's useful data? What does this data mean, and how do I make decisions from it? So in a lot of ways, that's data walls, etc., are examples of how you use data for an intent. You're not just doing this stuff because you're doing it, you're doing it for an intent. Okay? And that's something that has to be taught. So if you're going to get on this journey, that's part of the training that has to undergo.
Back to me, when I did. How did you know that I wanted to say something else? I think it's really important that you remember this catchphrase, which is putting faces on the data. So data is pointless unless it turns into action. And what I talked about with your leadership team in the last couple of days was we have an almost infinite amount of data that we can access now. As Professor Lynch says, what data are you looking to use? Be very careful about what you're looking for. And then ultimately, we send the fire truck to the fire. So we pinpoint in the data what it indicates that collectively our kids need in particular groups and then individually, so that we put a face on the data. How'd we go? Did we give you an answer? Excellent.
Hi. I want to pursue on the point that Jake was raising. How do you communicate to parents that their children are actually improving?
Thanks, Mr. Ibrahim. The notion of parental engagement and playing the communication game, I suggest you go to Miss Kathy's concurrent session afterwards on parental engagement. But fundamental in schools is that we are here, as a learning institution to build a learning program, and we deliver that with the children, and we engage the parental component, because we know that if we have effective understanding, and we know that we have the support of families, then the attainment levels of children rise. So that's what the research is telling us. So there are many mechanisms that schools put into place, and they change over time. From the traditional formal, homework letters, newsletters, and bits and pieces, to the more creative and innovative methods and technology that allows us to do things. Recording, activities in class, personal direct messaging, and that type of process. The attainment levels, outside the formal meeting times of assessments and tasks, is really incumbent upon the classroom teacher to take responsibility for working with parents on the student's learning. If a child is struggling, the child is attaining very well, sharing that accordingly. And we encourage and we expect teachers to take their professional responsibility to make contact in ways they see fit, and negotiate it accordingly with their parents about that. There are different levels. One is the individual level, one is the whole class level, and then there's the next one is the whole school approach. And developing different mechanisms to attend to that is a community responsibility. And as I said, it changes from time to time depending on what's working at that point and what's not working.
I think there's something particular in your question which is of interest, because if we're going to be collecting data and making judgments, etc., we really are starting to quantify improvement. So the question is that, in my mind, in response to what you've just said, is that how do we communicate this to parents, and how much will we give them? Well, I'm going to I'm going to propose it this way. If we go back in time, students used to attend school and were in a grade. Anybody old enough to remember that, grades? And if you didn't meet the grade, you repeated. So today it's pretty much the parlance now is year, third year, fourth year. With the consequent results, students just continue through the grades. And at the end of year 12 or whenever they leave, it's very debatable where they fit in the bell curve. They're not all at grade 12 standard. So what data does is it starts to create firm benchmarks about what year 3 should look like. So in my mind, there's a couple of dimensions to it. First of all, data allows us to quantify what year 3 looks like. So you can then basically say, your child is here where they should be here or here. So that's one dimension to it. The other dimension is getting to the stage where we start to work with parents to set some of those targets. Right? And this is the real point here. But not only the parent, but the child. So in a lot of ways what we're doing is we're making ourselves responsible. And if you like, what data-driven decision-making doing is putting a clear focus, but creating benchmarks from which we can make decisions. So heading towards the future, I can see where parents, a child if it's appropriate, and the teacher would sit down and negotiate what might be the benchmarks that we're aiming towards. And that's what those data walls really are about. And as good teachers, we have ways of desensitising the league table, because it's not a league's table. That's not the way you present it. It's more about showing that progress, those targets. I think there would be nothing more frustrating, and I can remember my own time at school. You know, I used to think I was really working very hard when I was a kid, only to get a C, you know, A, B, C. No, I thought it was an A. So in a lot of ways what we're doing is saying that this is what an A looks like, you're actually a B, and to get to an A you need to do this, this, and this. And data gives us a light to focus on that. That's what data means in that context.
And then that gives me an opportunity to say something that could be a little controversial, because you've set it out so nicely, Professor Lynch. But I think it's time that kids realised that not everyone wins a prize. That in fact, effort is married to success. If you want to do well, you have to work hard. You have to try. I'll speak to those children when I get home.
No, it's not a question, it's just an addition, because we will use one strategy that we have learned these 2 days with Tina, which is yes and, instead of yes but. We were using all the time data to give information, but how we are interpreting information will drive our conversation. I understand that from the PYP perspective, every child has a skill. It could be a skill in English or in literacy, in mathematics or numeracy, we have no problem, but it could be also in PE, in arts, and in all other subjects. So how we are interpreting these data and how we are communicating these data to parents will make a huge difference. And we have to start by yes and. Thank you.
I'm aware of the time, so maybe just one or two more questions. And
Now, I'm coming from a British curriculum background, and I know that it's influenced by the sort of industrial revolution. The IB framework that we follow is a more current and fresh framework. So the curriculum has developed, but how will our pedagogy and practice and art and science of teaching look like in the next 20, 30, 40 years? Will it change?
I want to give that to Lynchy.
I'm trying to think about how I can say it in a succinct way. Let me come at it from a couple of ways. The first thing is that I think is that teachers are one of the professions that won't fade out. So, and when I talked about automation, for example, they're one of the that won't fade out. I think what we're going to see, and this is what we've been seeing over the last 10 years, are explosions in understanding about how the brain works. So I'm going to suggest that the world of teaching, the professional knowledge, will move very quickly from Piaget, Ausubel, Skinner, Brunner, De Bono to the brain sciences, where in actual fact teachers will have greater insights into how the brain is working, should be working, or could be better working. And it's from that knowledge base, I think, that we will start to reconceptualise how we do our business. I'll give you an example. One of the things that frustrates me is that teachers talk about, university teacher educators tell student teachers about learning styles. And we all have different learning styles. You've ever heard that we're auditory learners? Some are auditory learners? What? It's nonsense. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. The brain science tells us that we all process learning the same way. There are not... The problem is we have different dispositions in life, right? Different dispositions in life, we have different interests. But we all learn the same way, right? We all learn the same way. So if you go along and say, and this is where it's redefined teaching, oh, some people in maths, they're best told. No, that's, if you like, an example of how it hasn't kept place with the learning side. So that's going to be a fundamental, better understanding of the brain and how things work, because it really is starting to demystify a whole lot of myths that continue to operate in schools. You know that boys learn differently to girls? Have you heard that one? We have different dispositions. And that's cultural, you know. Some of it's nurtured, some, you know, well. Anybody want to debate that point with me?
I'm going to throw in one too, because Riz, obviously what you're talking about is a platform where we realise that we live in a knowledge economy and information society. So being the master of content is no longer what we need to be as an excellent teacher. What we need to be able to do is that we need to be able to access our kids to how to think critically at a higher order level, how to inquire, and this is fantastic in IB schools, of course, with your curriculum. So the way to the future when we're preparing kids for jobs that we don't even know exist yet is to get them to work collaboratively, cooperatively, to be independent but interdependent workers, and we really, really have to learn how to deliver blended learning that uses everything that we have on offer through social networking and ICT capacities and make it part of how we teach, not just an add-on, that we actually teach through the technological capacities that are available. So if you can take something away from that one, and I know you know this, Riz, it's about the fact that the kids can find the content, it's at their fingertips. We need to teach them to be discerning, to know what a valid source is, all of that business around research, but what's really important is that they can think and do the thinking independently of us. You don't get it back.
Let's just clarify something, because teachers need to be knowledgeable. Don't think that teachers of the future won't have knowledge or specialties. It will be more diverse, if you like. So one of the things that I want you to, and this is part of the debates in teaching, we need smart people. We need smart people in teaching because it's a complex profession. And part of being smart is you have knowledge. Content, if you like, but knowledge is more about the application of that knowledge. So my point is that don't fall in the trap where we adopt this notion that teachers don't have to learn stuff themselves. If you're going to teach geography, you need to know geography. Get what I'm saying? Don't fall in that trap where you can say, oh, I can teach anything because I'm a teacher. Nonsense. I've sat through many lessons where, for example, one teacher said, we'll look at Singapore today. I think it's an island. She thinks it's an island? Maybe we could Google it.
Thanks, Mr. Riz. Come and see you later. Mark Treadwell has done a lot of work in terms of the brain theory, and his latest work on learning will be of great interest to you.
One of the challenges are working and leading with teachers from different countries and teacher training backgrounds who all hold different values and beliefs towards good practice and teaching and learning, of course. What are your views on this particular challenge and perhaps aligning good or outstanding practice? This question is open to all of you. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start. Having worked in the IB for 8 or 9 years now and in 3 different cultural settings, and prior to that worked in Australia obviously, it's a real challenge in many, many ways. And the only thing I can say to that as a leader of a school is that it's through this notion of being a teacher that you can bring the diverse cultural perspectives, understandings and differences together. So one of the key things I think I try to do, if at all possible, is to look for the similarities. And what are they? So I'm a teacher from Jordan, and I'm from Germany, and from China, and Japan and Australia. Well, one similarity is that we're responsible for teaching other people, children. So what does that mean? So if you are confronted with multiple and diverse cultural perspectives, you look for similarities, and there's a sense of humanity in teaching that transcends, if you like, or is universal across the board. So our intent is to have our people we work with to be better people, perhaps. Perhaps our intent is to get them to learn something together. But when you click into that area, then it begins to come together for you. So you've got to find the similarities first, rather than focus on what the differences are. And you'll find once you ask those questions that you start to get more congruence and agreement between what it is. And I think what they've done here is provided you with some very provocative sort of questions and ideas and things to think about. But ultimately it's bringing those groups together to talk about this thing called teaching. Yeah, you probably will be. You can.
I'm going to use a little analogy. I'm going to cycle back to Mr. Riz as well. One of the beautiful things about the medical profession is the fact that when you go to see a doctor, the doctor does not say to you, "Oh, look, I don't believe in antibiotics." The next doctor does not go, "Oh, I do believe in antibiotics." They all adopt the same framework for medicine. One of the things that frustrates me, and that's bringing back to the learning sciences, is the number of personal opinions that teachers bring to teaching. "Oh, I don't believe that. I do it this way. I value it this way." My point is this. What makes a mature profession is that we do adhere to evidence. So values and beliefs, we're human beings, yes. And I'd like to think, as members of the human race, that those values and beliefs are fairly tight. I'd like to think that. But when it comes to the notion of teaching, we've got to narrow that. And it's the evidence and data that narrows it. Because if you don't believe in phonics, which is what I hear teachers often say, "Oh, I don't believe in phonics." That's the sign of an immature profession. And it's as silly as going to see a doctor and the doctor says, "You haven't got cancer because I don't believe in it." See my point?
So, again, you lead me exactly where I wanted to go, Professor Lynch. So, making space is about a shared vision. You have a shared vision at Dala Marefa and you live that mission and that vision. And what's really important now is that you can articulate a through line, a line of sight, that people have a shared understanding of where you're travelling to, what your priorities are, what your endpoints are, what impact evidence you want to be able to show in terms of data, and that you are all contributing to the pieces. If you remember that net that I said worked, gets the big tick. It's about when everyone's connection to each other, cross-sector, cross-subject, is about living the vision, the mission of the school, and achieving the through line or the line of sight. And you'll hear a lot more about that in the future.
Okay,
And that's what we do in induction.
I said one question, but Mr. Catlett has a very important question he wants to ask.
That's no pressure, is it, Sally? Thanks. One of the things Tina touched on over the past couple of days was reciprocal accountability. And this question is for Dr. Jake. As principal of our school, I think it'd be helpful to get an insight into what you feel are the main requirements to build our human capital, and how you would kind of prioritise these, not only to empower but also enthuse us as staff, please. It's a two-way thing. So we have a responsibility, and we have certain duties, but we also have things that we can expect from the other people that we deal with. I hope that's clear.
Okay. If I hear you correctly, what you're asking is, what's my view on the building of the human capital within our school staff community? Excellent. Well, as Mr. Ken introduced at the beginning, using the Full and Hargraves framework, that professional capital is a function of the interaction of decisional capital, social capital, and the human capital component. So the reality is that the human capital process isn't in isolation. It's in connection, with the decisions that we take and the social interactions that we have. But the human side of things, when you look at the reciprocal accountability component, is that we do things in negotiation. We do things in partnership. The whole premise of building an outstanding school, is built upon the professionalism of the teacher, in collaboration with their peers and colleagues, and building a framework, using the data management, all that sort of things. So in terms of your own individual contribution to that, it's about your planning and your professional setting, your setting of your own goals as such. So you are coming from within, so that's your side of things. I need to work on this, I need to help that. I collaborate with my peers, the reciprocal component to the story. I listen to them, I give insight, we get backs and forwards, and then we build your own teacher portfolio framework that actually develops from the ground up and showcases your contribution to that. In terms of my view on professional learning or building that capability of the individual, to be more knowledgeable, to et cetera, it's about working together in that shared space. And you would note that at our school we are very clear, or I'm being very direct, I suppose, about setting up the spaces, setting up the opportunities for people to share their story. Because I can't help you if I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're on about. But I need you, reciprocally, I need you to come and tell me. I'm not here, to try and second guess, and you're not here to second guess, the people you work with. You have to bring it together. So we're looking for, and my view or my vision for that is that I'm looking for people to stand up and seek and to ask and to move forward. If you want professional learning, you want to go and visit another grade and see how they're teaching phonics or with the case, you come forward. That's from the internal. And then the reciprocal side of things is I'll help, well, with the help of others, to help me help you get where you are. But what we don't want is silence. We don't want people to sit and wait. a compliance. That's it. Okay. So, and we'll be working more on that, and I'm hopeful that in the practices that we've had established in the last 12 months, or the last half of the 12 months anyway, we're moving towards this notion of support and collaboration and etc. I hope that goes some way to answering your question.
Thank you, Jake, and thank you so much for all of those questions and the answers. Just to finish off with the panel here, I just want to pass a couple of observations, and then I think we're off to lunch, I'd imagine. The first one is that there are some exceptional speakers here who are very, very knowledgeable in their area, and please, over lunch or whenever, if you have another question, go and talk to them. But the second one is this: your school is an IB school, an International Baccalaureate School. The IB as a curriculum is probably one of the only ones in the world, but I can stand to be corrected on this, who explicitly says we teach inquiry through an inquiry lens and frame. We also work and learn through concepts. So if you take those two alone, then you add this thing called collaboration, and you can't be an IB school unless you collaborate. So there's three elements there that require you to operate effectively within a curriculum. They're asking you to be inquirers. Inquiry-based teaching, it's explicit. Here was examples of how that happens. And that would be an expectation in any of those schools. And if you don't inquire, if you aren't an inquirer, then how on earth could you even ask your children, your students, to do that? If you don't collaborate, and it's not cooperation, it's collaboration, where arguments exist, but generally a shared understanding and agreements emerge through the collaboration, then you couldn't possibly ask your kids to do the same. And if you don't have an idea about how to teach concepts, what does that mean in relation to content of the past, then I suggest you go and find out, because it's fairly important. So what sat underneath this conversation today, from my way of thinking, was not only building professional capital, which makes a school outstanding in my humble view, but how do you enact a curriculum that's in fact asking you to do these things that's been spoken about today? So share with me in thanking the speakers today for their time and their effort. I certainly appreciated listening to everything you had to say, and for you, your questions, and then we'll hand over. So thank you very much.